Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie, The Empty Man in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. West Films Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called The Empty Man. I am also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Films. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it. All the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this. We will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office, collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. The Empty Manisa 202. Zero supernatural horror film co-edited, written, and directed by David Pryor in his feature directorial debut, based on Cullen Bunn and Vanessa R. Del Rey's graphic novel The Empty Man, published by Boom Studios. Starring James Badgedale and Marin, Ireland. It follows an ex-cop who, upon an investigation into a missing girl, discovers a secret cult. Originally filmed in August 2017, as an international co-production between the United States, South Africa, and United Kingdom, the film received poor scores at test screenings, and distributor 20th Century Fox lost faith in its commercial prospects. The final product, theatrically released in the United States on October 23, 2020, was still considered a rough edit by Pryor. Released in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, the film grossed $4 million worldwide, against a budget of $16 million. It received mostly negative reviews from critics and audiences at the time of its release. Reception improved after the film came out on home media and streaming services, and it was reported by some publications that The Empty Man gained a cult following. Plot: in 1995, in the Ura Valley, Bhutan, four friends, Greg, Fiona, Ruthie, and Paul, go hiking on a mountain, crossing a footbridge along the way. Paul hears a strange whistling and falls into a crevice while wandering towards the sound. Greg finds him in an almost catatonic state, sitting in front of and staring at a massive ancient humanoid skeleton with inhuman features embedded in the cave wall. Paul only speaks to tell Greg not to touch him, or else he will die. Greg carries him out, and the group takes refuge at an empty house as a snowstorm hits. The next day, having touched Paul the previous day, Ruthie is chased by a tall creature wearing robes, which disappears as if it was a hallucination. That night, Paul, slowly possessed by the evil spirit, whispers something into Ruthie's ear. The following morning, the group finds Paul next to the bridge they crossed. Ruthie becomes dazed before stabbing Greg and slicing Fiona's throat and throwing their bodies over the cliff. She shares an entranced look with Paul before throwing herself off too. Paul stares on. In Missouri 2018, former detective James LaSombra is grieving the death of his wife, Allison, and their son, Henry, who died in a car accident a year ago. He is friends with his neighbor, Nora, a widowed single mother. Nora's daughter, Amanda, runs away, and they find a message written in blood in the bathroom saying, "The empty man made me do it." While searching Amanda's bedroom, James discovers a flyer from a group called the Pontifex Institute with Tulpa written on the back. Amanda's friend Devara reveals that she and their friends were encouraged by Amanda to summon the Empty Man, a local legend. To summon the Empty Man, you must first find an empty bottle on a bridge, blow into it, and then think of the Empty Man. Each friend takes part, including a reluctant Devara. The next day at the mall, Devara witnesses Amanda whispering into friend Brandon's ear. James investigates the bridge and finds the empty bottle. He proceeds to blow on it, just as the teenagers had done previously. He goes underneath the bridge and discovers the hanged bodies of Brandon and the rest of Amanda's friends with the same message found in Amanda's bathroom. Devara sees the Empty Man, who attacks and kills her in the steam room of a spa with a pair of scissors. A brief flash shows Devara holding herself by the throat and stabbing herself with the scissors. The police rule her death a suicide and dismiss James's suggestions. There is more going on. James researches the Pontifex Institute discovering it is a cult that has beliefs originating from places like Bhutan and in tulpas, which he further researches on Wikipedia. He believes he hears the empty man that night and is besieged by nightmares. He travels to the Institute and sits in on a talk by cult leader Arthur Parsons. Speaking to Parsons, he is alarmed at the leader's references to the empty man, claiming him to be an entity that provides his followers with what they want as long as they do his bidding. James begins to think he sees the empty man. He follows cult members and investigates a cabin in the woods where he finds files on Amanda, her friends, Paul, and himself. He witnesses the cult performing a fire ritual, but is spotted and pursued by the cult. He suspects that Amanda is now a member of the cult and informs Nora that she is not safe. He takes Nora to a hotel to hide. It is revealed that the pair were having an affair, and he was with Nora when Allison and Henry died. Suffering from hallucinations, James ambushes and kidnaps a cult member, Garrett, and asks him what is happening before brutally beating him. Garrett claims that there is a man in the hospital from whom the empty man is transmitting to the cult. James discovers that the man is actually Paul, who is in a comatose state and regularly visited by cult members to get messages from the entity. He finds Amanda in Paul's hospital room. James calls Nora, but she does not know who he is. Amanda explains that Paul is dying from the strain of being the empty man, and that the cult needs a new vessel. She tells James that he is a tulpa, a new vessel for the being, and that his memories and relationships were fabricated by her and the cult to ensure the deity's connection through his pain and loss. She explains that the anger, grief, and fear in his life were key to allowing connection with the empty man. According to Amanda, James has only existed for a few days. James breaks down and finds himself in a limbo-like plane, where he is chased and caught with the being entering his body as a result. He experiences a series of flashbacks and distortions that show his core memories wavering and distorting out of existence. Back in the hospital, James executes Paul as Paul opens his eyes. James finds himself surrounded by several members of the hospital staff. They bow to him, the nameless entity in control. Cast: James Badge Dale as James Lasombra, Marin Ireland as Nora Quayle, Stephen Root as Arthur Parsons, Ron Canada as Detective Villiers, Robert Aramayo as Garrett, Joel Courtney as Brandon Mybaum, Sasha Frolova as Amanda Quayle, Evan Jonick as Greg, Virginia Cull as Ruthie, Samantha Logan as Devara Walsh, Jessica Matten as Fiona, Phoebe Nichols as Nurse Allerton, Aaron Poole as Paul, Owen Teague as Duncan West. Production. Development. On February 9, 2016, it was announced that 20th Century Fox acquired the graphic novel The Empty Man from Boom Studios for a feature film, with David Pryor hired to write and direct the film. The supernatural thriller film would be produced by Ross Richie, Stephen Christy, and Adam Yolen. On July 7, 2016, it was announced that James Badge Dale was cast in the lead role as an ex-cop plagued by the violent deaths of his wife and son, who tries to find a missing girl, 9/10. On September 27, 2016, it was announced that Aaron Poole was cast in the film to play Paul, an outdoorsy adventurer. Although marketing uses the 20th Century Studios branding, The Empty Man was the last film to feature the original 20th Century Fox logo in its entirety. 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine briefly showed the logo as a tribute. Design. Creature designer Ken Barthelme designed and sculpted the cave skeleton and other elements for the film. Pryor hired him to work on the designs in 2016. Because the shooting schedule was close, Barthelme had only a short amount of time to work on the designs. The main qualities Pryor was looking for were ancient age, authority, menace, and subtly more than human. Pryor sent him paintings from Polish painter Zdzisław Beksinski and mentioned the space jockey in Alien for reference. Those inspirations eventually led Barthelme to the film's final design. Barthelme sculpted the cave skeleton in 3D. His model was 3D printed and built on set by production designer Craig Lathrop and his team. Filming. A majority of principal photography took place in South Africa. In late 2016, but the final week of production was set for Chicago, which would double for St. Louis. With bad weather on the horizon, Pryor had several conversations with the studio about whether to pause production until the spring or to adjust to the threat of winter weather. When Chicago received 2 feet of snow overnight, the decision was made for them. Pryor hit pause on the production and everyone went home. During this time, Fox's executive vice president of production, Mark Roybal, left the studio. According to director David Pryor, Roybal was essential towards the greenlighting of the film. Production resumed once a new executive was hired. Approved on a budget of $16 million, Pryor said about $11 million was used on the shoot. The final week of production resumed in September 2017 in Edwardsville, Illinois, with some filming done at the Madison County Courthouse. Filming also took place at the Chain of Rocks Bridge and moved to another undisclosed location after 3 days. Post-production. The crew had found itself with several unexpected months to start on its working cut due to the production pause. But after filming wrapped, Pryor was told he had to assemble a version of the print for test screenings almost immediately. When test screenings occurred, Pryor was told to assemble a cut almost immediately after production had ended. It was some ridiculous overlong thing, Pryor said in an interview. We just hadn't had a chance to really fully digest it yet. Following low test scores, the studio began panicking over losing a tax rebate from South Africa due to impending deadlines. Pryor ultimately delivered his final cut of the film with 6 extra minutes, in which he would later consider it a rough edit in an interview he initially intended to cut out. Post-production of the film was also strongly impacted by the Disney acquisition of 21st Century Fox, which was initiated in December 2017. Release. The Empty Man was theatrically released on October 23, 2020, by 20th Century Studios. The film features the former 20th Century Fox logo, despite the studio's name change earlier that year. The film was originally scheduled for release on August 7, 2020, but was delayed to December 4th due to the COVID-19 pandemic, before being moved up to the October date following the shifting of Death on the Nile. In the United Kingdom, the movie skipped a theatrical release entirely, instead being released on Disney Plus via StarHub and other VOD services on February 19, 2021. Reception. Box office. The Empty Man grossed $3 million in the United States and Canada and $1.8 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $4.8 million. The film grossed $1.3 million from 2,027 theaters in its opening weekend, finishing 4th at the box office. 53% of the audience was male, with 53% also being over the age of 25. Analysts blamed the film's low box office performance on the audience's initial assumption of another creepypasta-based supernatural teen horror film in the vein of films like Slender Man and The Bye Bye Man, hesitation to return to theaters due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and zero marketing push from the studio, with social media analytics corporation RelishMix saying, "The campaign on social for 20th's The Empty Man dropped just 1 week ago, on October 16th. Any normal campaign for an indie, one-off, high-concept, or awards contender will obviously drop at least 2 months out, at the latest." The film fell 57% in its second weekend to $561,000, then made $294,350 in its third. Critical response. The Empty Man was not screened in advance for critics upon its release. While initial reviews were mostly negative, the film has undergone some critical reappraisal as a modern cult favorite, featuring in several best-of lists from publications including Polygon and The Ringer. On the review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, 76% of 29 critics have given the film a positive review, with an average rating of 5.810. Barry Hertz of the Globe and Mail gave the film 2 4s, writing, "Producers couldn't have picked a better title, though. After I left my Friday afternoon screening, attended by a whopping 2 other people, I felt far from satisfied. Empty, you might say." Writing for The Only Critic, Nate Adams gave it a D, summarizing that, running an overlong 2 hours and 20 minutes, The Empty Man, probably the bastard cousin twice removed from The Bye Bye Man or Slender Man, Not good company, is a total bore. Tresdean at Vulture declared it the next great cult horror film. Michael Gingold of Rue Morgue gave the film a positive review, saying it's not at all the movie that its trailers are selling, and in this case, that's a good thing. Brian Tallarico of RogerEbert.com gave the film 2.54 stars and wrote that this is a truly surreal and strange piece of work, anchored by some top-notch craft. I suspect horror fans will be surprised by a movie experience far fuller than I was expecting. Writing for The Ringer, Miles Surrey said, "It's one of the best horror films in years, unlike anything you've ever seen." Audience response. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of D+ on an A+ to F scale. PostTrack reported 42% of audience members gave the film a positive score, with an awful 25% saying they would definitely recommend it. However, since first debuting on VOD in 2021, the film has gained traction as a modern cult favorite, describing the film's swelling social media reclamation and status as an honest-to-Cthulhu cult movie. Adam Naiman at Mubi noted that its financiers could have had a niche hit or even a cause célèbre on their hands if only they'd packaged their wares as elevated horror. Film School Rejects wrote, "As happens with most cult movies, The Empty Man's audience has started to view the film's alleged weaknesses as its strengths. Sometimes a film's trajectory from inception to viewers can impact expectations. Let's just say that the list of worthwhile movies that sat on the shelf for years and were then dumped into theaters with almost no promotion and no critic screenings is incredibly short. So while it's nice to say that we approach all films with the same blank slate of critical thought, I have to admit that I wasn't expecting much from The Empty Man, now finally available on VOD after so much struggle to get here. While it's clear as to what scared studio heads about this adaptation of the graphic novel of the same name, those same issues are almost certain to build a cult following around this sometimes striking and memorable studio oddity. Advertised, however, slightly as a traditional horror film, this is a truly surreal and strange piece of work, anchored by some top-notch craft elements, but weakened a bit by a bloated running time and a conclusion that likely left the few people who saw it in theaters more annoyed than thrilled, hence the startling D+ on CinemaScore. The Empty Man draws comparisons to junky studio fare like The Bye-Bye Man and Slender Man. But this is a far more ambitious and accomplished piece of work than its reputation. David Pryor's film sets itself apart from the typically rushed Hollywood genre flick by allowing itself a 22-minute prologue that's remarkably effective, even if it does add to the bloated 137 minutes total. Four friends are hiking in Bhutan in 1995 when one of them hears a sound in the distance that only he can hear. He wanders off, only to fall into a crevice. A friend hurriedly rappels down to find the young man seated and staring at a terrifying skeleton. He gives him one warning that's not heeded: "If you touch me, you'll die," before he goes catatonic. His three buddies take him back to a nearby cabin, and then things get really weird. The prologue to The Empty Man is an effective short film on its own, arguably more so than the rest of the film, and it sets the stage nicely in terms of tone, even if it's indulgent for a movie that's already pretty long. Cut to the meat of the story in Missouri in 2018. Enter James LaSombra, James Badge Dale, who is celebrating his birthday alone. Flashes of memory and conversation detail the trauma that James now lives with after the loss of his wife and child in a car accident. His only friend seems to be a neighbor named Nora, Marin, Ireland, who comes to James when her daughter Amanda, Sasha Frolova, goes missing. The investigation seems half-hearted because Amanda is over 18 and can do what she wants, but James can tell there's something more to it, and not just because there's a message in blood that says, "The empty man made me do it." James finds a friend of Amanda's named Davara, Samantha Logan, who tells him that their group tried to summon the Empty Man recently. The story goes that if you blow into an empty bottle on an empty bridge, the Empty Man will come to you. The first night, you'll hear him. The second night, you'll see him. The third night, you'll feel him. Of course, the legend of the Empty Man owes a great deal to other stories like Bloody Mary, Candyman, and Slender Man, but Pryor's film quickly moves on from a traditional boogeyman story to become something much stranger as James discovers a cult of people may be involved in all of this, including a leader played by Stephen Root. And then he learns that he really has no idea what's going on, as the Empty Man avoids a traditional jump scare structure by getting more and more surreal, eventually tying back into that prologue in an unexpected way, and reaching a crazy conclusion that I'm not sure makes a lick of sense. But give me a movie that goes off the rails more than one that neatly wraps up in a predictable way every time. If it sounds like a lot of movie, even for 137 minutes, that's because it is. While it has felt like a lot of miniseries lately would have worked better as feature films, The Empty Man is the rare movie adaptation that feels like it should have been a Netflix original series. Imagine the effective prologue as an entire first episode. And an episodic structure would allow some of the film's many themes to build in a manner that the rushed final third of this film just doesn't allow. At a certain point, The Empty Man loses too much of its atmosphere and dread because it has to barrel to a conclusion. Yes, it's long in a counterproductive way because maintaining a horror tone for 137 minutes is almost impossible, but it's also too short for this story. It becomes cluttered in the final third as revelations pile up and detract from the overall tone of impending doom. And yet, there's more than enough to like for genre fans. Cinematographer Anastas N. Mikos uses space and light well, somehow making the bright snow of the prologue just as imposing as the dark shadows of the final act. Pryor eschews jump scares in favor of atmosphere and feels like a very promising director. He's got the skills in terms of composition and structure, even if his dialogue is sometimes a little thin. He also works well with actors, as this is the umpteenth reminder that James Badge Dale should work more. Dale is an effective everyman who adds unexpected depth every time out. Most often, studios bury projects like The Empty Man because they're legitimately horrible and they're trying to figure out exactly how to write off their investment in a way that doesn't embarrass them too badly. However, every once in a while, a studio buries a project because they don't get it. How do you sell a film as surreal and unsettling as The Empty Man? You don't even try. If you're lucky, the audience finds it on their own. Will that happen with The Empty Man? It's too soon to tell how people will respond, but I suspect horror fans will be surprised by a movie experience far fuller than I was expecting. The 2020 horror may have a hard-to-decipher twist ending, but with The Empty Man explained the deeper layers of its ambiguous finale, vague plot, and the real tulpa meaning all become clear. The Empty Man was originally shot in 2017, but shelved for a few years when distributor 20th Century Studios was worried the adaptation of Cullen Bunn's 2014 graphic novel would potentially confuse audiences. Sure enough, when The Empty Man did arrive in October 2020, most reviewers dismissed the intriguing psychological horror as a convoluted yet paradoxically overfamiliar facsimile of the Bye Bye Man, Slender Man, and numerous supposedly similar genre efforts. However, The Empty Man became a cult hit, especially when it arrived on Hulu. In David Pryor's subversive horror movie, a group of friends goes hiking, whereupon one of them stumbles, quite literally, across a bizarre, misshapen skeleton in a cave. Soon after, all the group's members kill one another thanks to some mind control trickery, leaving only one survivor, Paul. Fast forward over 20 years, and a troubled former detective, James, is hot on the trail of a missing girl, though he's haunted by a long-limbed being from his dreams. The ending to this tale was a little ambiguous, but when explained shows how deep the Empty Man truly is. In the ending of The Empty Man, the protagonist James Lasombra, James Badge Dale, discovers that the cult he has been investigating is far more insidious and influential than he imagined. After following a series of cryptic clues and witnessing several supernatural occurrences, James finds out that he is a tulpa, a construct of the collective imagination of the cult and a vessel for the Empty Man. The cult believes that this entity, the Empty Man, can possess individuals, and that James is the latest the cult has created for this purpose. As James delves deeper, it becomes apparent that the cult has manipulated him from the beginning. His interactions, the people he has met, and the supposed coincidences he has encountered were all orchestrated, making him a suitable host for the Empty Man. In a disturbing twist, the cult's leader explains that the Empty Man requires a human tulpa, or thought form, to manifest, and that James must fulfill this role. The Empty Man concludes with a chilling sequence where James becomes fully assimilated as the Empty Man and accepts his fate. The final scene shows Shim being worshipped by the cult members disguised as hospital workers, with the implication that the Empty Man has taken complete control of his being. This ending leaves viewers questioning the nature of the entity and the fates of the characters involved, blurring the lines between reality and the supernatural, and suggesting a cycle of horror that could perpetuate endlessly through the cult's machinations. Having the Empty Man explained largely starts with the movie's cult, the Pontifex Institute. Their plan is strange and existentially loaded enough that most viewers may have trouble deciphering their intentions on first viewing. Essentially, the group is devoted to bringing an urban legend, the Empty Man, to life. Until now, they have been able to use Paul as a vessel ever since the unfortunate hiker accidentally found the Empty Man's body back in the 90s. However, Paul is dying after years of existing as little more than a host for the monster, meaning the cult needs to make a new conduit for the Empty Man, and quickly. Aware that any new vessel would be just as mortal and therefore temporary as poor Paul, the Pontifex Institute started to research tulpas as an alternative, self-renewing way of bringing the Empty Man to life. The cult members do offer all this information to James when he investigates them, but the question of how this works remains a mystery to him. That is because James has no idea what a tulpa is, and even less of a clue that he is one himself. As if to reaffirm the movie's cult potential and just how legitimately strange the story is, the Empty Man's tulpas have not been seen in much popular fiction outside the third season of Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks tweaked the tulpa concept a little by having them engineered in a lab, but tulpas crop up in many movies and stories. The Empty Man follows the more traditional tulpa route and explains that tulpas are a shared idea that is believed in by so many, and with such immense intensity that it transcends imagination and becomes a flesh-and-blood reality. In layman's terms, if enough people believe a tulpa is real, it will be. The Empty Man himself is an example of this phenomenon. If the Pontifex Institute manages to generate enough belief in the tulpa, it will become physically real, able to influence the world, and can then sustain itself. A comparable cultural institution that may help horror fans make sense of the premise is Freddy Krueger or Candyman, both of whom derived their power from people believing in them. A more recent example of a tulpa is Mr. Babadook, the monster from the Babadook, who is a manifestation of an idea from a kid's book that gets believed in so strongly that it becomes real. However, while viewers aren't unfamiliar with the concept of a tulpa being a villain as outlined above, the Empty Man goes a step further. The twist ending reveals that its hero, James, is also a tulpa. In The Empty Man, the Pontifex Institute created a tulpa in the form of James to be the new host of The Empty Man, with the 2020 movie's bleak ending, showing them devoting all their mental power to creating a tragic but believable backstory that ensured James would accept his role as the monster's human form. This is much more in line with Twin Peaks' use of tulpas, many of whom also have no idea that they're not human. James finally finds Amanda in a hospital, only to discover she faked her disappearance as part of the Pontifex Institute's grand plan. She notes the Empty Man has invaded James' thoughts, describing his presence as an itch on the brain, and tells him to accept his fate. This fate, Amanda reveals, is for James to replace Paul as the Empty Man's vessel. The villain reveals that James exists as a tulpa, a figment of the collective imagination of the cult. While this seems reminiscent of Bruce Willis being dead in The Sixth Sense, the twist of James in The Empty Man being not quite human isn't obvious upon rewatching. However, viewers have seen James interact with all manner of people and watched him sit at home alone in plenty of scenes while thinking back on his tragic life. Whether these moments were real or not isn't as clear-cut. When Amanda reveals the truth to James, he calls her mother Nora, who hired him, and although she is a real person, she's never heard of James. He is then transported home, and although it is a real house, it's empty and uninhabited. At this point, it becomes clear some of James's interactions with other characters were real, but others were part of the backstory invented for him. In classic Lovecraftian horror fashion, this revelation is too much for James, who voluntarily accepts the murky figure of the empty man into his body once he learns his true purpose. In the closing shots, James shoots the ailing Paul in the head, having replaced him as the eponymous creature's human host, and the hospital staff around him bow, thus proving that the cult's influence spreads further than the members seen earlier in the Pontifex Institute. The Empty Man ends with the hero discovering he never existed outside his connection to the titular monster. James willingly becomes the Empty Man's host, because that's what the cult created him to do. Part of the reason the Empty Man is a little confusing in a way that leaves a bleak aftertaste is easily explained. It's deliberate. Director David Pryor, who is currently involved with Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, wanted to create a movie that sticks with audiences. One of the best ways to do this in horror is with a dark, chilling ending which raises questions that viewers get the sense they don't necessarily want the answers to. When asked about the ending in an interview via Thrillist, writer and director Pryor was keen to share his thoughts on the ending, which was always in his The Empty Man vision. Pryor clearly understands the cosmic horror subgenre, which works best when filled with mystery, intrigue, and a little confusion. He cites H.P. Lovecraft as an influence, and the fact The Empty Man has gained such a cult following, pun unintended, proves that Pryor has nailed how to evoke the incredibly specific kind of terror that successful cosmic horror movies like the Lovecraft adaptation Color Out of Space generate. There's no news on a sequel to The Empty Man yet, but if it does have Pryor at the helm again, it will almost certainly leave audiences just as unsettled, yet intrigued, as the first installment. Critical response to The Empty Man were mixed, and this sentiment extends to its ending. It's almost unsurprising that the ending of The Empty Man would prove divisive, as David Pryor deliberately created a finale that encouraged viewers to analyze it for hidden depth. While this led to the movie gaining an admirable amount of praise, it also meant that the final moments left something of a sour taste for some audience members. Outside the obvious complaints that come with ambiguous or highly conceptual film endings, there were some who also felt that the pacing of The Empty Man was a little off, and the ending was a bit rushed. Critic Roger Ebert summed up the sentiment well in his review. However, pacing problems aside, there are plenty of positive reviews that praise the ending to The Empty Man, especially on a conceptual level. The ideas the film is exploring do feel incredibly unique, especially as tulpas haven't been the subject of many horror movies, especially those told from the perspective of a character that doesn't know they're a tulpa. Writing for Vulture, Tress Dean sums up why many are willing to look past the flaws that The Empty Man has. The Empty Man was released in October of 2020, but just recently dropped on HBO Max. The feature film debut of director David Pryor, The Empty Man follows an ex-cop, James Badge Dale, as he uncovers a sinister cult connected to the deaths of some teenagers and the disappearance of a young girl. The story, based on the graphic novel of the same name by Cullen Bunn and Vanessa R. Del Rey, incorporates a number of horror subgenres. On one hand, The Empty Man is a boogeyman tale in which a group of teenagers hear an urban legend and summon the titular Empty Man, who begins to influence the teenagers into making drastic and deadly decisions. On the other hand, the film is reminiscent of Ari Aster's films Hereditary and Midsommar, in which the primary antagonists of each film are cults. These subgenres are intertwined with a detective crime premise, as Dale's James Lasombra is a damaged, cynical ex-cop at the heart of the story. With so many plot threads at play here, The Empty Man warrants some explanation to clarify exactly how the cult, boogeyman, and detective elements work together to deliver a haunting film about grief and loss. When The Empty Man begins, it almost feels like an entirely different movie. But as the prologue unfolds, it's clear that these opening scenes set up the mythology, mechanics, and origin story for the film's supernatural big bad. In 1995, 4 friends go on a hike in the mountains of Ura Valley, Bhutan. When Paul, Aaron Poole, hears a faint whistling, he follows the sound into a cavern in the mountain. One of his friends, Greg, Evangelicite, goes down to rescue him, only to find Paul sitting in front of a strange shrine to a large skeleton, its many limbs positioned symmetrically around it. "If you touch me, you'll die," Paul whispers. Greg, ignoring Paul's warning, carries his friend out of the cave, but Paul remains mute and limp, and there's a snowstorm coming. The group of friends finds shelter in an abandoned cabin. Upon inspecting Paul's body for injuries, Greg notices scars on his wrists, signs of past or even recent psychological issues. This is an important detail, as is later revealed in the film. The Empty Man looks for people who are vulnerable. Day 1 ends with the group of friends sticking out the storm in the cabin. Before she goes to sleep, Paul's girlfriend Ruthie, Virginia Cruel, finds a whistling instrument and blows through it. On the second day, Greg and his girlfriend Fiona, Jessica Matten, leave the cabin in search of help. While they're away, Ruthie goes outside in the snowstorm, thinking she sees someone in the distance. But it's not just someone. It's an entity shrouded in black, ominously walking towards her faster and faster. Once Ruthie retreats back into the cabin, Greg and Fiona arrive, but don't believe what she saw. On the third day, Paul disappears from the cabin. His friends find him sitting in front of a bridge, blowing into the whistling instrument. Before Greg and Fiona can find out what's really going on, Ruthie reveals a knife and kills them before throwing herself off the cliff. Paul is the only one left alive, though he most certainly isn't Paul anymore, but merely a shell for the Empty Man. The rest of the film departs from the opening setting and characters and takes place 23 years later in Webster Mills, Missouri. Despite this departure, the story maintains the same 3-day structure leading up to the Empty Man's final resurgence. We follow James LaSombra, Dale, an ex-cop who recently lost his wife and son in a car accident. Of course, this vulnerable state makes James an ideal victim for the Empty Man. He even celebrates his birthday by himself at a diner. His only friend, it seems, is Amanda, Sasha Frolova, the daughter of his neighbor, Nora, Marin, Ireland. When Amanda runs away, her mother enlists James in cooperation with the local police to find her. Day 1 begins with James's investigation. He finds the words, "The Empty Man made me do it," painted with animal blood on Amanda's bathroom mirror. He also finds a flyer for the Pontifex Institute in her journal. When he finds one of Amanda's friends at school, James asks her about the Empty Man. Devara, Samantha Logan, describes how the Empty Man is some sort of urban legend. In order to summon him, you go onto a bridge and blow into a bottle. Devara mentions that's exactly what she, Amanda, and the rest of their friends did. In search of Amanda's other friends, James goes onto the bridge where they had been that night, only to find their dead bodies hanging below the bridge. However, Amanda is not one of them. That night, Devara is eventually possessed by the Empty Man, stabbing herself multiple times with a pair of scissors. Like James, the police have no clear answers either. Commenting on other related deaths attributed to the Empty Man, Detective Villiers, Ron Canada, states, "We can't indict the cosmos." That night, James thinks there's an intruder in his house, perhaps the Empty Man himself. On day 2, James pays a visit to the Pontifex Institute. During one of their services, he finds out its members worship the Empty Man. Not only is he a boogeyman of urban legend, but some sort of religious icon for the cult. He confronts the leader, Arthur Parsons, Stephen Root, who explains how the Empty Man calls out to certain people from a different realm. Before leaving, Parsons mentions how glad he is to see James again, though James thinks it is his first time at the Pontifex Institute. After exploring the building, running into groups, meditating, and calling out to an entity in the dark, James is kicked out. Outside, he meets Garrett, Robert Aramayo, who informs James that Amanda is part of the cult and taken to a camp in the wilderness. James goes to the camp, and in one of the cabins, he finds a file cabinet with an empty folder with his name on it. Another clue that, as the cult leader hinted at, James has been part of the Pontifex Institute before. Outside, just as the day turns into night, he witnesses a fire ritual with members shrouded in darkness who ultimately chase him out of the wilderness. On the third and final day, James follows Garrett and other cult members to a hospital. They kneel before a bedridden man who we recognize as Paul, first possessed by the empty man 23 years ago in Bhutan. James kidnaps Garrett, who explains that Paul has been some kind of gateway and antenna for the empty man to enter our world. James goes to the hospital himself and finally finds Amanda tending to the bedridden Paul. She explains that the empty man is in need of a new vessel as Paul is reaching his end. Amanda and the Pontifex Institute have been preparing and grooming James to be the next vessel, the next empty man. Amanda knew that James had an affair with her mother Nora, and that he had not been with his wife and son because of the affair, which ultimately led to their deaths. Using James' trauma and grief, she and the cult were able to brainwash him and made him a tulpa, a blank slate for the mythical being to occupy. As it turns out, everything about James has been fabricated. From his affair with Nora, to his birthday 3 days ago, to his tragic backstory of grief and loss from the deaths of his wife and son, the Pontifex Institute molded James, who might have been someone else entirely before the events of the film, to become an empty vessel for the ancient spirit. After this revelation and a series of hallucinations, the empty man finally takes over James as his followers at the hospital kneel before him. The Empty Man cast image via 20th Century Fox. For a film titled The Empty Man, the movie is full of plot points and twists. It's a juggling act of subgenres, characters, timelines, and plot threads. But underneath these complicated layers, The Empty Man is about how one chooses to cope with grief, loss, and trauma. Like the boogeyman in such horror movies as The Babadook, the empty man, a spirit of pure darkness in a black cloak, is the symbolic personification of the internal psychological darkness that many people face in everyday life. Paul, the empty man's first vessel, has scars on his wrists as a result of past mental health issues. James, after the loss of his wife and son, becomes a disgruntled ex-cop living alone and having nightmares from his past. The empty man comes to those most vulnerable to this darkness, those who seemingly have nothing left to live for. In a sense, his victims are ones who are already living a life of emptiness and unfulfillment. This is also how the film's cult elements become relevant, as cults also use people's vulnerabilities to garner a sense of community and belief. Ari Aster taps into this cult mentality in his films Hereditary and Midsommar, where people in relationships tinged by loss are co-opted into cults with nefarious intentions. In The Empty Man, James Lasombra is seemingly satisfied with living his life alone. Though he reconnects with Nora once her daughter goes missing, James still pushes her away. Even when cooperating with the police force, James prefers to work alone as a rogue agent outside the law. But as the film unfolds, it is revealed that James did seek out a community in the Pontifex Institute. He lent himself to the cult's mission to summon the Empty Man. For some people who feel a sense of emptiness in their lives, they look for meaning and fulfillment in the concept of shared belief in something bigger than themselves. Such is the danger of cults and the pitfalls of being alone during a time of great loss and trauma. David Pryor's feature directorial debut is a juggling act of psychological horror and the occult. It poses questions about the nature of belief, whether in an urban legend about a boogeyman or in a cult's mission to resurrect an ancient supernatural being. The Empty Man is definitely a difficult watch, not because of its horror elements, though there is no shortage of disturbing death scenes and ritualistic imagery, but because of its dark themes and depictions of loss, grief, and mental illness. Imagine, if you will, a skewed sci-fi reality that envisions a Black Mirror episode, but for an entire movie? Can you even begin to grasp what that would look like? Maybe you can if in the last few years you've seen Foe or Fingernails, or Don't Worry Darling, or Swan Song, or Love Me, or The Pod Generation, or The Substance or Possessor, or any one of the many attempts to recall the magic of at least some of the sci-fi anthology's earlier episodes. It's not as if the Charlie Brooker created series was the first to spin What If. nightmares from the dangers of tech, but its stickiness has had a noticeable effect on younger creators eager to say something about the times we live in. Companion, a wink-wink pre-Valentine's sci-fi comedy, is not just part of that trend, but also belongs at the back of the long line of post-Get Out social thrillers, standing behind Fresh and Blink Twice, using an outlandish conceit to comment on something we're all too aware of. The film, from the first-time writer-director Drew Hancock, is an attempt to skewer a certain familiar type of shitty guy whose outward nice bro persona betrays a corroded and controlling core. He's played by Jack Quaid, son of Meg Ryan and Dennis Quaid, who has cleverly turned his handsome and charming Nepo baby privilege into something ultimately petulant and pathetic. It worked well as one of the Reddit-pilled killers in Scream 5, and works well here too, even if his character feels a little underbaked. I should add that even if trailers have already semi-ruined the big reveal, ideal consumption of Companion might require reading the bare minimum, rather like least year's similarly twisty Strange Darling. So consider the extremely spoiler-averse warned. Cards are revealed relatively early here, though, a relief given how awkwardly Hancock tries to keep them hidden before then. While the best films that lead to a big twist keep you intrigued and maybe unsettled before being genuinely surprised, the worst keep you frustrated at how little makes sense without an inevitable reveal on the way. With every huh or what or why one might utter in the first act, you can almost hear Hancock reassuring us that it's fine. A twist is coming to save the day. We begin as Quaid's scrappy good guy Josh takes his hopelessly devoted girlfriend Iris, heretic standout Sophie Thatcher, away for the weekend, always a bad sign in a modern thriller, to spend time with his friends at a sleek, remote mansion. But she's convinced they don't like her, and is forever feeling marooned on the outskirts, a feeling compounded when something terrible soon happens. It turns out that Iris's unwavering obsession with Josh, sex on demand, a constant need to be near and compliment him, is not in fact a natural inclination, but one that was programmed by him. She arrived in a package, their supermarket meet-cute was picked off a rom-com list, and his smartphone dictates her every characteristic, both physical and mental. But unlike in the recent Netflix-acquired hit Subservience, or in next year's upcoming M3 GAN spin-off Soul Matey, it's not the robot that's the one to fear, but rather those that have chosen to purchase and then play with her. What does it say about the kind of man who would prefer a dynamic such as this? And how much should he be punished for playing God with technology? There's some brief fun in the unraveling chaos of a plan gone wrong when the film recalls darkly comic 90s noirs like Best Laid Plans and Dead Man's Curve, but it peters out too fast, any big ideas and reveals exhausted too soon. Hancock mostly chooses comedy over thriller, but his script isn't really sharp or funny enough for that lane. Its smug jokes about programming and simple, grasping gender commentary becoming repetitive. Quaid is a believable asshole once again, but his character's whiny one-note brand of online sexism is too obvious, the film never quite managing to get us fully invested in the empowered female takes down shitty male thrust of the last act. It's as superficial yet as assured as Blink Twice was last year, not really saying all that much, yet possessing an unearned swagger anyway. Like a lot of first-time writer-directors, including Companion's producer Zach Kreger, whose showy film Barbarian impressed others more than it did me back in 2023, Hancock is a far better director than writer, and so the film is more sleekly made than it is thoughtfully written. He adds far more gloss than $10 million would suggest, with convenient inconsistencies. A short yet stretched runtime and a rather flat fight-to-the-death Terminator-esque finale, leaving things on a so-what shrug. For a film about advanced technology, it's all awfully simple. The Empty Man, a local legend to summon the Empty Man, you must first find. An empty bottle on a bridge, blow into it, and then think of the Empty Man each friend takes part, including a reluctant Var the next day at the mauled Vara. Witnesses Amanda whispering into friend Brandon's ear. James investigates the bridge and finds the empty bottle. He proceeds to blow on it. Just as the teenagers had done previously, he goes underneath the bridge and discovers the hanged bodies of Brandon and the rest of Amanda's friends with the same message found in Amanda's bathroom. Vara sees the empty man who attacks and kills her in the steam room of a spa with a pair of scissors. A brief flash shows Devara holding herself by the throat and stabbing herself with the scissors. The police rule her death a suicide and dismiss James' suggestions. There is more going on. James researches the Pawn Effects Institute, discovering it is a cult that has beliefs originating from places like Bhutan and Inulpus, which he further researches on Wikipedia. Believes he hears the empty man that night and is besieged by nightmares. He travels to the Institute and sits in on a talk by cult leader Arthur Parsons. Speaking to Parsons, he is alarmed at the leader's references to the empty man, claiming him to be an entity that provides his followers with what they want, as long as they do his bidding. James begins to think he sees the empty man. He follows cult members and investigates a cabin in the woods where he finds files on Amanda, her friends Paul, and himself. He witnesses the cult performing a fire ritual. Buta spotted and pursued by the cult suspects that Amanda is now a member of the cult and informs Nora that she is not safe. He takes Nora to a hotel to hide. It is revealed that the pair were having an affair, and he was with Nora when Allison and Henry died, suffering from hallucinations. James ambushes and kidnaps a cult member, Garrett, and asks him what is happening before brutally beating him. Garrett claims that there is a man in the hospital from whom the empty man is transmitting to the cult. James discovers that the man is actually Paul, who is in a Camille Mouse state and regularly visited by cult members to get messages from the entity. He finds Amanda in Paul's hospital room. James calls Nora, but she does not know who he is. Amanda explains that Paul is dying from the strain of being the empty man and that the cult needs a new vessel. She tells James that he is a tulpa, a new vessel for the being, and that his memories and relationships were fabricated by her and the cult to ensure the deity's connection through his pain and loss. She explains that the anger, grief, and fear in his life were key to allowing connection with the empty man. According to Amanda, James has only existed for a few days. James breaks down and finds himself in a limbo, is chased and caught, with the being entering his body. As a result, he experiences a series of flashbacks and distortions that show his core memories wavering and distorting out of existence back in the hospital. James executes Paul. As Paul opens his eyes, James finds himself surrounded by several members of the hospital staff. They bow to him, the nameless entity in control. James Badale as James Lasombra, Marin Ireland as Nora Quayle, Stephen Root as Arthur Parsons, Ron Canada as Detective Villiers, Robert Aramio as Garrett Joel, Cor Tortney as Brandon Maybon, Sasha Flova as Amanda Quayle, Evan Johnny Kite as Greg Virginia Cole as Ruthie, Samantha Logan as Devar Walsh, Jessica Matten as Fiona Phoebe Nichols as Nurse Allerton, Aaron P. as Paul Owen, Teague as Duncan. West production on February 9th, 2016. It was announced that 20th Century Fox acquired the graphic novel The Empty Man from Boom Studios for a feature film, with David Pryor hired to write and direct the film. The supernatural thriller film would be produced by Ross Richie. Stephen Christy and Adam Yolan on July 7th, 2016. It was announced that James Badal was cast in the lead role as an ex-cop, plagued by the violent deaths of his wife and son, who tries to find a missing girl on September 27th, 2016. It was announced that Aaron P. was cast in the film to play Paul, an outdoorsy adventurer, although marketing uses the 20th Century Studios branding. The Empty Man was the last film to feature the original 20th Century Fox logo in its entirety. 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine briefly showed the logo as a tribute reception. The Empty Man grossed $3 million in the United States and Canada and $1.8 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $4.8 million. The film grossed $1.3 million from 2027 theaters in its opening weekend, finishing fourth at the box office. 53% of the audience was male, with 53% also being over the age of 25. Analysts blame the film's low box office performance on the audience's initial assumption of another creepy pasta-based film in the vein of films like Slender Man and The Bye-Bye Man. Hesitation to return to theaters due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and zero marketing push from the studio with social media. Analytics Corporation Relishmix saying the campaign on social for 20th, The Empty Man dropped just 1 week ago on October 16th, any normal campaign for an indie one-off high concept or awards. Contender will obviously drop at least 2 months out at the latest. The film fell 57% in its second weekend to $561,000, then made $294,350 in its third. The Empty Man movie review. Sometimes a film's trajectory from inception to viewers can impact expectations. Let's just say that the list of worthwhile movies that sat on the shelf for years and were then dumped into theaters with almost no promotion and no critic screenings is incredibly short. So while it's nice to say that we approach all films with the same blank slate of critical thought, I have to admit that I wasn't expecting much from The Empty Man now, finally available on VOD after so much struggle to get here, while it's clear as to what scared studio heads about this adaptation of the graphic novel of the same name. Those same issues are almost certain to build a cult following around this sometimes striking and memorable studio oddity, advertised, however, slightly as a traditional horror film. This is a truly surreal and strange piece of work, anchored by some top-notch craft elements, but weakened a bit by a bloated running time and a conclusion that likely left the few people who saw it in theaters more annoyed than thrilled. Hence the startling D+ on CinemaScore. The Empty Man draws comparisons to junky studio fare like The Bye-Bye Man and Slender Man, but this is a far more ambitious and accomplished piece of work than its reputation. David Pryor's film sets itself apart from the typically rushed Hollywood genre flick by allowing itself a 22-minute prologue that's remarkably effective, even if it does add to the bloated 137 minutes total. For friends are hiking in Bhutan in 1995 when one of them hears a sound in the distance that only he can hear. He wanders off, only to fall into a crevice. A friend hurriedly rappels down to find the young man seated and starring a terrifying skeleton. He gives him one warning that's not the aided "if you touch me, you'll die" before he goes catatonic. Just 3 buddies take him back to nearby cabin, and then things get really weird. The prologue to The Empty Man is an effective short film on its own, arguably more so than the rest of the film, and it sets the stage nicely in terms of tune-eveny. Fits indulgent for a movie that's already pretty long cut of the meat of the story in Missouri in 2018. Enter James Lasra, James Badaloo, who is celebrating his birthday alone. Flashes of memory and conversation detail the trauma that James now lives with after the loss of his wife and child in a car accident. His only friend seems to be a neighbor named Norm in Ireland, who comes to James when her daughter Amanda Sashaflova goes missing. The investigation seems half-hearted because Amanda is over 18 and can do what she wants, but James can tell there's something more to it, and not just because there's a message in blood that says "the empty man made me dough." James finds Sefrienda of Amanda's name, Devara Samantha Logan, who tells him that their group tried to summon the Empty Man recently. The story goes that if you blow into an empty bottle on an empty bridge, the Empty Man will come to you the first night. You'll hear him the second night, you'll see him the third night, you'll feel him, of course. The legend of the Empty Man owes a great deal to other stories like Bloody Mary, Candyman, and Slender Man. But Pryor's film quickly moves on from a traditional boogeyman story to become something much stranger as James discovers a cult of people may be involved in all of this, including a leader played by Stephen Root, and then he learns that Hurley has no idea what's going on as the Empty Man avoids a traditional jump scare structure by getting more and more surreal, eventually tying back into that prologue in an unexpected way and reaching a crazy conclusion that I'm not sure makes a lick of sense. But give me a movie that goes off the rails more than one that neatly wraps up in a predictable way every time. If it sounds like a lot of movie, even for 137 minutes, that's because it is. While it has felt like a lot of miniseries lately, would have worked better as feature films. The Empty Man is there a movie adaptation that feels like it should have been a Netflix original series. Imagine the effective prologue as an entire first episode, and an episodic structure would allow some of the film's many themes to build in a manner that the rushed final third of this film just doesn't allow. At a certain point, The Empty Man loses too much of its atmosphere and dread because it has to barrel to a conclusion. Yes, it's long in a counterproductive way because maintaining a horror tone for 137 minutes is almost impossible, but it's also too short for this story. It becomes cluttered in the final third as revelations pile up and detract from the overall ton of impending doom, and yet there's more than enough to like for genre fan cinematographer Anistas Nico. Uses space and light, well, somehow making the bright snow of the prologue just as imposing as the dark shadows of the final act prior, issues jump scares in favor of atmosphere, and feels like a very promising director. He's got the skills in terms of composition and structure. Even if his dialogue is sometimes a little thin, he also works well with actors, as this is the nth reminder that James Badale should work more. Dale is an effective everyman who adds unexpected depth every time out. Most often studios bury projects like The Empty Man because they're legitimately horrible and they're trying to figure out exactly how to write off their investment in a way that doesn't embarrass them too badly. However, every once in a while, a studio buries a project because they don't get it. How do you sell a film as surreal and unsettling as The Empty Man? You don't eventually if you're lucky. The audience finds it on their own. Will that happen with The Empty Man? It's too soon to tell how people will respond, but I suspect horror fans will be surprised by a movie experience far fuller than I was expecting a couple of years ago. I did a review of a short horror film called AM 1200. There's a whole story behind that, including ordering a copy straight from the director just so I could read the liner notes, but you can read that review here. The bottom line is that I liked the movie a lot and was looking forward to a feature film from the creator David Pryor. Unfortunately for Pryor, and for me, his first feature film turned into something of a horror show. There were weather-related production delays, tax breaks that forced early screenings that did not go well. And then the executive that had championed the production left just before Disney showed up to buy the studio when it finally did come time to release the film. It seems like no one who was left at the studio knew what to do with it, so they dumped it like an inconvenient body in a back alley with no fanfare, no promotion, and a misleading trailer. Audiences and critics, what there were of them, seemed to expect a different kind of film, something like a teen-focused creepypasta/urban legend mashup. Initial reactions were not kind. The release was so limited and so undersold that I never even heard about it until months later when Sailor Monsoon included it in one of this film's. I saw monthly wrap-ups. Hold on. I thought that title sounds familiar. A quick look around at the various review outlets seemed to suggest The Empty Man was a bomb, barely comprehensible, and derivative of a number of other films that weren't any good either. That did not sound like something the filmmaker that had crafted such a tense, creepy little film as AM 1200 would produce, and I wondered just how bad studio interference had been. Sadly, I held off from seeing it for months, expecting to be disappointed. I own The Empty Man digitally on Amazon, mostly because there's no Blu-ray release. There is apparently a DVD release that could be rented from Redbox, but no mass market option, and none on the horizon that I could find. It's too bad because I think this movie would look great on Blu-ray. And I dearly love a commentary track for streaming options. The Empty Man is free for subs on HBO Max, Cinemax, and Spectrum On Demand. It can be rented from Apple TV only and purchased from the usual online vendors. The Empty Man is based on a Boom Studios comic book series by Cullen Bunn and Vanessa R. Del Rey. Anyone who expects a straight-up adaptation is bound to be disappointed. The comic deals with an ongoing apocalypse, a pandemic of contagious insanity and violence. The film is more of an inspired by production, though I suppose you could look at it as a prequel. The first 20 minutes of the film features a group of young people climbing a remote mountain. The entire sequence is eerie and effective, involving a strange corpse and a countdown of days as one of their number The void's errand pool becomes catatonic and horrific events begin to pile up. I really love this opening. I also think it's extraneous. There's a certain amount of myth B building going on with this opening, providing a background for the events that occur in the main body of the film. But if you just start at the 20 INUT mark, the film works perfectly fine. It also drops the running time to under 2 hours. I tried watching the film without the opening this time around, and I think I actually prefer it that way. It leaves us more at sea with the events of the film. Much like our protagonist, that's James La Sombra, played by Hay. I know that guy from something. James Badale Lombra is that familiar broken man character, an ex-cop still living with the grief of losing his wife and son in a car. Accident Dale plays La Sombra, as if his grief fills him like shards of glass. Every movement, every glance, every interaction, one of barely contained agony. This is a man just existing. We know this guy. We've seen him in 100 films. He's not so internally focused on his misery that he can't help a friend, though. Nora Marin Ireland and James have history. But when Nora's daughter Amanda Sashaflova goes missing, James volunteers to help find her. His only clue is a phrase written on Amanda's bathroom mirror in blood. The empty man. Made me do it. You may at this point be wondering if the early responses to the film were correct. This sounds like something like Slender Man, maybe crossed with a traditional murder mystery and a late 90s teen slasher flick. I know that's what it sounds like. What you're missing is the performance, the sharpness of the cinematography, the editing, the lighting, the music by Luster, which is practically a character by itself. It's just creepy, the whole thing. Of it, that too, and everything drips with meaning, even the main character's name. Lombra, the shadow. He's a shadow of his former self. Yeah, and so his life, but there's another meaning that becomes clearer as the film progresses. James tries to interview Amanda's friends, but he can only find Devara Samantha Logan, who tells him that the empty man is a local legend, a sort of boogeyman. The legend says that if you blow on an empty bottle on a certain bridge, then you'll summon the empty man on the first day. You'll hear him on the second, you'll see him, then he'll come get you. Guess how long it's been since Amanda and her friends blew a bottle on the bridge. When James investigates the bridge, he finds the bodies of Amanda's friends hang. Beneath it, with the empty man made me do it phrase scrolled next to them. Not Amanda, though she remains missing. And so James keeps looking, eventually finding his way to the Pontifex Institute, a cult posing as a self-help program. Amanda's been there, and according to the cult leader Arthur Parsons, played with unsettling earnestness by Stephen Root Lombra, has been there before as well, though James is just as certain that he's never been there before. Things begin to unravel from there. James starts to hear sounds in his house, like someone approaching down a hallway, though no one is there when he opens the door. Dvara is killed by some kind of specter, or perhaps it was suicide. And the Pontifex Institute isn't just some Scientology wannabe. It has plans that include changing reality itself. There are people who seem to define themselves by their trauma. It's their loss and grief that make them who they are, as much or more so than any other history or behavior. This is true of a lot of people to one degree or another. I am who I am because of what I have been through. Fire forges steel and all that. For James, though, that core identity is scar tissue, weak spots, cracks through which the influence of the empty man can be felt in between. There's an old camp where rituals are held and intruders aren't welcome there. Are hospitals with strange patients. There are creepy films, creepy stuffed bears, and creepy subs where familiar chairs await. And of course, there's the empty man counting down the days until he can get James, or until James can get him. I'm keeping details purposefully vague despite desperately wanting to discuss them, because this is a film that keeps you guessing, and it's worth experiencing the twists for yourself. There are elements of philosophy, identity, and belief that mean that it's also a film that rewards multiple viewings, even knowing what's coming. Pryor is layering meaning and references into every scene. Other information about this film, movies that begin with the and end in man in the horror genre, have lately filled me with dread with the exception of The Invisible Man. I can't think of a good film with this combination of words in the title. So, imagine how I felt seeing the poster for The Empty Man if you thought I was prepared for a long, slow, boring film that tried far too hard to be smarter than it was then. You know, me far too well. And you also just described the film to it. The Empty Man, based on the comic book of the same name, takes place in a small town where a bunch of kids take part in a strange little ritual, apparently. If you find a bottle on a bridge and blow in it while thinking about the Empty Man, a creature that no one knows what he looks like before they think about him. But let's not question the logic this early in the review. Then you summon him on day 1. You hear him on day 2. You see him on day 3. He gets you naturally. This leads to the kids getting in some kind of danger. And the only one who might be able to save them is a former police detective named James Lasombra, James Badal, who will go through anything to figure out the truth about the Empty Man. The Empty Man opens promisingly with a group of hikers climbing a mountain and happening across a strange skeleton in a cave. Everything before the opening credits was interesting and clever. It had moments of tension and a dramatic climax. It set up how the Empty Man works. The rules of the horror that we'd be witnessing were laid out, and it's actually effective with a lot of good performances, interesting visuals, and a genuinely effective ending that showed just what this being could convince people to do. If I had any sense, I would have walked out when that opening scene was done, because everything that followed was god-awful. Every rule that had been set up in the first 15 minutes was broken by the rest of the movie. Every bit of tension that we got with 4 hikers in a cabin was lost when it became a story of a small town cult. If you turn up late and miss the opening, you will miss the only good part of the entire film. For the bulk of The Empty Man, we're following James as he learns about the Empty Man, and unfortunately for us, James is a boring character with no personality worth clinging onto. He just feels jaded there. I say empty when it comes to emotions. He barely reacts to anything. A lack of reaction that reaches comical levels. During a scene where he stumbles upon 5 teenagers who hung themselves under a bridge, it's a haunting image, especially for the audience, as these are all characters we've met before, and now they're hanging in a perfect line with a message written in the girder that they're hanging from. And James reacts like he's found a crack in the wall and is trying to figure out what brand of filler would be best for him to repair when he also has to budget in a new coat of paint for the wall. When they get to the overly complicated climax, he's still just as boring. Only now he occasionally raises his voice every now and then. He's a nothing character that at best keeps the plot moving through inertia. You not only end up not knowing a damn thing about him, but you don't really care what's happening to him, and can't even tell if he's being somehow overtaken by the Empty Man, because his performance never changes. He's not helped by just how generally bad everything around him is from bad, sometimes hammy performances by people who are supposedly helping the Empty Man to jump scares that were so bafflingly bad that there are moments I wasn't even sure what I was meant to be jumping at, but I knew that the film wanted me to jump because it made the loud, blaring foghorn sound that every bad film makes when something scary happens and they want to make sure you jump so you will later claim that you got scared. I didn't get scared. I was startled, and there is a substantial difference between those emotions. Then there are just the wasted opportunities that get to become irritating by just how many there are. The Empty Man has a lot of moments where they show a dark room off to the side of the main character. Good. Horror movies with subjects like summon demons who would like to make the audience tense would use this kind of shot to hide the demon. in the darkened room so the audience sees it and gets scared about what's going to happen. Look at the recent Netflix series, The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is a masterclass of hiding the scary thing in plain sight and making the audience themselves. The second they spot it, this isn't a good film. They just couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. I reckon they just didn't line the shot upright to make this large canvas. Then there's the number of times that we don't see anything creepy at all. We're just watching a boring investigation in a film that clearly set itself up to be creepy. Keep in mind this film opens with people seeing a weird-ass skeleton. One of them goes catatonic and whispers constant nonsense, and then death comes to mess with them. This is how we open. And we don't really get any of that again until near the very end. This film is 2 hours long. You couldn't find a single minute in that to maybe show me something creepy. Oh no, but this film does have the time right near the end to do the thing that I hate the most. Pointless strobe lights that were so bad, I actually had to look away from the screen again. You haven't scared me. Now you've irritated me. That's not an option. You should pick seriously. I consider anyone who uses strobes in a movie to just be a hack who doesn't care about the well-being of their audience. And when they also make a film that could double as a sleep aid, that backs up my claim at 2 hours and 17 minutes. The Empty Man is a bloated mess. So much of it feels pointless at the halfway mark. Feels like we've changed gears and gone into a completely different bad film. The Empty Man spends most of the time just running on fumes. It has no good ideas or clever shocks or even any actual horror that's worth a damn. It just wastes time. I can't even get the energy to actually hate this movie. Hate would imply that it left a mark of some kind, and I doubt I'll even remember this one by the time this review goes live. That's how boring and useless. This movie is just watch the opening scene on YouTube when it inevitably gets uploaded there. Pretend this was a short film and move on with your life. 4 friends are hiking in the Himalayas when one of them, Paul Aaron Poole, hears a sound that the others cannot, following it. Paul falls into a crevice when his friend finds him. He is horrified to find Paul sat immobile, cross-legged, in front of a horrifying tableau, a skeleton with multiple arms. Paul whispers a deadly warning. If you touch me, you'll die. The warning is not heeded and things go very badly. Indeed. Flash forward to the present and we meet James Lasra. James Badal, a former police detective who is marking time waiting to die after the death of his wife and child in a terrible car accident, he agrees to help a distraught friend, Nora Marin Ireland, whose 18-year-old daughter, Amanda Sasha Flova, has gone missing. Amanda left a cryptic message on her mirror before she disappeared. The Empty Man made me do it. Amanda and her friends had taken part in a game to summon the Empty Man. If you're on a bridge and you find an empty bottle, if you hold the bottle to your lips and blow while thinking of him, then the Empty Man will appear on the first night, you'll hear him on the second night, you'll see him, and on the third night, he'll come for you. If that synopsis reminds you of Slender Man, the dire adaptation of a creepypasta story, then think again, because the Empty Man is a very different beast. I had never heard of the film until recently when every U.S. film journalist I rate started posting about it. A troubled shoot issues with reshoots and the recent Disney takeover of Fox meant that The Empty Man had a disastrous rollout. It was dumped in cinemas at the height of the pandemic and will be making its way to Disney Plus UK on July 9th, but as befits a story about an urban legend, The Empty Man is gaining a reputation as the must-see horror movie of the summer. The Empty Man is a dread-inducing, surrealist nightmare of a movie directed by David Pryor and freely adapted from a Boom comic series of the same name by Cullen. But The Empty Man is an extraordinarily original horror. It's about repetition, thought collective consciousness, and how ideas can infect like a virus. It's about how our lives on a base level can be reduced to a loose leaf folder of key moments. It's about how time can strip ritual of all meaning, But the power in the gestures remain. It's at least 3 different movies in one at 2 hours and 16 minutes long. The Empty Man is very long for a horror movie, and yet, weirdly, it's not long enough at a certain point. The nerve-shedding atmosphere gives way to a race to provide exposition as the movie hurtles towards its conclusion. You have to wonder if this might have worked better as a miniseries. There is just so much going on. You have 3 very different films here, all blended together. First, there is the neon noir with the ex-detective helping the friend, with whom he has a murky past, find her lost daughter. Then there's the movie about the terrifying cult who worship an ancient entity. Oh yeah, just as you feel you've gotten a grip on this movie, a cult shows up, finally it's a teen thriller, riffing off Candyman and a million urban legends to win its tale of the Empty Man. It's not surprising the Disney people had no idea how to market it. Everything about the Empty Man feels off. You're kept off kilter from the first frame. The camera lingers on empty spaces. Many shots are lit with a yellowish green tinge, giving everything a sickly sheen. The soundtrack is a discordant hellscape, and there's a clicking sound which, while highly derivative of both John and Hereditary, is still absolutely bloody awful to listen to and purposefully distressing. It's a nerve-jangling movie. It's like David Fincher decided to make a horror movie. There aren't many big, brutal set pieces. Although the taut opening 20 minutes are nigh on perfect, but there are so many disturbing images and exchanges that linger long in the memory. A friendly exchange. I'm so glad you decided to come. Back has haunted me. There's a set piece at the end of Act 2 which leaves the detective exclaiming, "Hell no!" A sentiment shared by anyone watching it, surrealist, disturbing, and haunting. The Empty Man deserves to find a genre audience. It has the makings of a bona fide cult classic, the sort of film where every moment will be freeze-framed and analyzed for meaning. It'll be haunting me for years. More detail. The Empty Man is not at all the movie that its trailers are selling, and in this case, that's a good thing. Bearing a 2018 copyright and a 2-hour, 17-minute running time, this is a clear case of a film the studio didn't know what to do with, and ultimately threw to the wolves in the midst of the pandemic. With a marketing campaign that only began a week before its release, you'd think from that misleading preview that The Empty Man is another cheesy small-town bogeyman flick on the order of the Bye-Bye Man, but it proves to be one of the more weirdly ambitious and occasionally avant-garde horror films to be released by a studio in some time. It doesn't all work, but enough of it does, and it is crafted well enough that it's a shame. Fright fans will have to head out in these uncertain times if they want to have the full theatrical experience of it. For the record, I caught the first show today, with mask on in an auditorium with only 6 other distance people, so I felt pretty safe. Bottom line, many worse. Horror films got wide breaks with advanced screenings in years past. In any case, The Empty Man is so not the film you'd expect from the way it's being sold that I'm loath to describe it in too much detail. What can be said is that you know from the start that this is not your typical suburban teen Schreier. When it opens with a 23-minute prologue set in the mountains of Bhutan in 1995, where a quartet of hikers run afoul of a strange and threatening force. We then cut to Webster Mills, Mo in 2018, where we meet former cop turned security store owner James Lasombra, James Badaley. And if that name wasn't enough of a wink, consider that the local teenagers attend Jacques Derrida High School. One of those youths is Amanda Quayle, Sasha Plova, daughter of James, good friend Nora Marin, Ireland, who turns up at James' place seeming vaguely troubled and spouting odd philosophical platitudes. The next morning she vanishes, leaving a reference to the Empty Man scrolled in blood in her room. James' attempt to track Amanda down on Nora's behalf leads him to learn of the local legend of the Empty Man who has his own only in the movies. Mythology, blow into an empty bottle discovered on a bridge and call him to mind, and he'll stalk you over the course. of 3 days, Amanda and a group of her friends did just that a night or so back, which has now apparently put them on the Empty Man's hit list. This story element, however, is only a very small portion of the film. And in fact, the scene that resolves it in an unexpected manner packs one of several genuine shivers scattered throughout The Empty Man from the start. The Empty Man issues the CW on the big screen look of many films of this type and adopts a subdued, mournful tone. Writer, director, David Pryor. Relation to cult schlockster David Pryor does just as much with silence as he does with sound and music. Things do start to get a little more bonkers as he gets into the meat of his movie. And James goes down what proves to be a very deep and strange rabbit hole, to which Dale reacts with well-conveyed determination, fear, and just the right amount of humorous disbelief. The story becomes bigger and odder than James or the audience expects, particularly if those viewers are fans of Cullen Bunn's graphic novels. The credited source with it, which considerable liberties have been taken in Bunn's illustrated version. The Empty Man is a virus that induces mania and catatonia and leads to quarantining, etc. All references to the plague have been removed here, which makes this the first horror film of 2020 that's accidentally not relevant to this year's events. Some of the developments over The Empty Man's long but never dull running time are chilling and startling. Others remain head-scratchers, and a few are downright goofy, and Pryor deserves credit for pure crazy ambition, even if it's fulfilled more in parts than in the whole. He has also marshaled a strong group of collaborators. The film seeps with mood thanks to cinematographer Anisto's Mike Hose, who's worked with Milos Forman and Joseph Rubin, while the odd couple of classical horror composer Christopher Young and industrial dark ambient musician Lustard contribute a cohesive and chilling score, although the movie is really Dale's show. In terms of acting, Ireland's so good in Brian Bertino's soon-to-release The Dark and the Wicked, Prolova Stephen Root, and Joel Courtney all contribute strong moments amidst the evolving weirdness. Pryor has previously made documentaries and featurettes on films by David Fincher and Cronenberg, among others, and it's clear he's learned a few good lessons from them. Considering the way The Empty Man has been dumped, it seems uncertain whether he'll get to tackle another feature anytime soon, but I'm glad he got to make this one. The Empty Man feels like a modern version of the Candyman, at least until the remake releases later this year, just in that film people who summon him do not believe in the myths, but everyone else feels wary of this mysterious figure. However, unlike the Candyman, the Empty Man does not make any statements about how the evil figure comes to be racism, or any other social evil is not mentioned in the mythos, though occult features heavily. In fact, there is barely any backstory to the Empty Man that explains its presence. This may have been something that would have been explored in any other future films if they are made. Nevertheless, I don't think this lack of exposition will make this horror movie any less diminished. It managed to fan the flames of my curiosity for those unaware. The Empty Man is based on a graphic novel of the same name. Thankfully, you don't have to be familiar with the original source material, as the film is a good introduction to the world of The Empty Man. The Empty Man follows a young girl who goes missing after performing a ritual that is rumored to summon the Empty Man, her mother soon. Reports the daughter missing, but the police seem unwilling to pursue it further, thinking she has most likely run away. However, a family friend, James, who used to be a police officer, offers to help look for her daughter. For her, his investigation leads not only to the myth of the Empty Man, but also to a cult that seems at first a positive-thinking, harmless cult, but has more nefarious intentions. The initial first scenes with the hikers who encounter the gigantic skeleton in the cave really got me wholeheartedly interested in the mythos of the Empty Man from the get-go. The cold and harsh world around the hikers set against the mysterious cave with the terrifying colossal skeleton that is in the shape of a man is something that will leave your body cold and uncomfortable to watch, as one of the hikers is mysteriously afflicted, ending up in a catatonic state. They have to take refuge in an empty house, fearing for their friend's health, but unable to do anything until the storm clears. They are just left pondering what they saw in the cave. These initial scenes are perhaps one of the most hauntingly beautiful yet gruesome scenes I've seen in a long time. David Pryor, the director, makes us stare into the void and love it unabashedly in the silent terror that falls upon these hikers. I am utterly involved in this film before it has even properly started. The Empty Man will fortunately answer some of these questions, but not all. However, The Empty Man is not solely a horror movie, which may be disappointing depending on your expectations. Just like The Candyman, the main protagonist is seeking the truth for their own personal reasons. So the journey to the truth is just as exciting as its final destination. It is a mixture between a horror and a mystery thriller, which is not a bad combination at all, even though it is classed as a supernatural horror, which it does have elements of, but there is a permeating existential dread in every scene, though. It has some mystery elements. Make no mistake, it feels like a cosmic horror throughout. Fatalism and impending doom are fully saturated throughout The Empty Man. This is done beautifully with the cinematography. In this, it took a subtle approach in that we felt like something was always lurking near James. In this is achieved by wide-angle shot and transitions that feel disconnected from the events in some scenes, as panic and terror overcome some of the characters. The visuals are fractured, similar to their mental states. This aesthetic is reflected as well in the audio, which enhances the empty void that is felt by everyone that comes in contact with the Empty Man. Nish's famous phrase, "If you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you," is mentioned, and Pryor manages to perfectly encapsulate this feeling throughout the whole of the movie. The Empty Man, unfortunately, was a victim of obscurity as the company in charge of its production and marketing changed hands. However, that in no way reflects on the quality of this film, which in my opinion is the best horror movie of 2020. Frankly, I would be shocked if The Empty Man does not become a cult favorite of horror enthusiasts years down the line. Extra information. It's a great treasure going into a movie completely blind. That was the case with David Pryor's The Empty Man, a film that was released in October of 2020, but has only recently begun to receive attention. I didn't know this film existed until a few weeks ago when some people whose opinions I trust were tweeting about this film, so I figured, what the hell, and rented it. And I purposely avoided watching a trailer or reading anything past the brief synopsis. Sometimes you just know when you should go in blind. And I was right. The Empty Man is a hypnotically patient and utterly terrifying horror film. Had I known about it last year and seen it, it would have certainly been in my favorite 25 films of that year. It's a true hidden gem. So, with all that, I recommend going into this as blind as possible. Stop reading right now if you can take the opportunity, based on the little-known comic series The Empty Man. Pryor's film follows James Badal, a retired policeman who investigates the disappearance of his neighbor's daughter and to summon an evil entity. Note, this could have been written by Ed Brubaker with its neon morting and an occult evil. The narrative directorial debut of David Pryor is a massively impressive one. He cut his bones under David Fincher, directing and producing the documentaries on the bonus features of Fincher's films. The documentaries he made on the Zodiac Director's Cut Blu-ray are particularly good. He's confident and ambitious, two of the most important qualities I like in a debut. He's not afraid to play things slow and atmospheric and avoids convention even when it's teed right up for him. I was powerless against how confident and exact his debut was. As the film goes on, the titular boogeyman is employed less of a traditional urban legend slasher. It sets it up as, and something more unknowable and unexplainable. The film continually did things I did not expect, and it did them with calm assurance from Pryor's direction. He knows how to execute a scare and keep us on edge. This film just scratched so many itches of mine cult Lovecraft nor. I'm also a sucker for films that don't drop their title card until 20 minutes into the runtime, so I was helpless here. When The Empty Man did just that, after a knockout prologue, a bit of history on how a film this good and unique ended up being dumped onto VOD during the pandemic, with no awareness it was one of the last movies made under 20th Century Fox in 2018 before Disney bought them, and Disney looked at a 2+ hour bizarre and slow horror film and said, "We don't know what to do with this shit," and eventually dumped it on VOD in October of 2020, and the little marketing they did certainly didn't do the film any favors. The trailer makes it look as generic as possible, like some bland DVD release, and the poster looks like it was made in 5 minutes in Photoshop. This is a harder film to describe to people, but they do themselves an injustice by trying to make the film look as shitty derivative as the trailer and poster would make you think. Its prologue is certainly one of its inarguably best features. It sets a mythological background for what we're about to get into with confident control of mood. It's clear we're in for a worthy ride in these first 20 minutes. Dare I invoke The Exorcist in comparison to how it presents its ancient evil via mood and dread for the first 20 minutes of its film. I've always liked James Badalio, so any opportunity he has to lead a film, I'm there. He always steps up to the plate, no matter the role. He has two of the most realistic reactions in a horror situation that I've seen in a horror film. You'll know them when you see them. Stephen Root puts on a great one scene. Show Stealer 2, the cinematography by and Astas Mike Hose is superb. He and Pryor let their scenes take their time in long takes and make excellent use of empty space. There's plenty of shots where you're looking real close and can't tell if you're actually seeing something in the distant darkness and shadows, or if you've just tricked yourself into seeing something playing with the film's examination of urban legends. There are some real nightmarish images from this film that are seared into my brain. One word: bonfire. You'll know it when you see it. Terrifying. They use the division of mirrors and windows to break up the frame to slowly set the stage for an ever-shifting reality. Christopher Young and Lustmore craft a slow tonal work that subtly amps up the dread to nightmarish proportions as the film goes on. I have no clue what was going on for the last 15 minutes of that film, but by that point, I didn't care for the specifics. The roads we had taken to get they were so fascinating I could forgive any stumbling through exposition. I was a frog caught in the slow boil of this film. If I understood it perfectly, I wouldn't love it as much. If that makes sense. It's a wonder this got made by a major studio at all. They just don't make 2+ hour slow burn genre films. Especially not ones based on a property that so few know about that it might as well be an original idea. It's a shame. This wasn't properly advertised prior to its release, but thankfully the word of mouth has it headed for cult status. Wish I'd even known about it when it got dumped last year, but I'm immensely glad it found me the way it did, and that I went in knowing absolutely nothing. It definitely is one of my favorites to be released in 2020. I hope you give it a chance, and I hope it takes you by complete surprise as well. The Empty Man was shot in 2017 and had to wait for years to finally come out, caught in the net of 20th Century Fox being purchased by the Walt Disney Company, and thus owned by a corporation that had absolutely no idea what in hell's name they were supposed to do with something this cold and soaked in death, to be fair to Disney. I'm not sure that any other distributor would have had better luck. The Empty Man is a very strange sort of horror movie that doesn't have any natural spot to go in the contemporary horror marketplace, and it's a little hard to see why a major studio thought it was worth tackling this adaptation of Cullen Bunn and Vanessa Ardell Ray's 2014 comic book miniseries in the first place. Though my impression is that the film's writer-director David Pryor didn't feel too terribly constrained by his source material. So who knows? The point is, The Empty Man is weird as hell. Weird as only a junkie looking by the books horror movie that feels like it has enough narrative content to justify a 137-minute running time could be. Here's one. Of the many wild and unexpected things about the movie, it earns that running time, or at any rate, it's not as hilariously awful about it as I had assumed it would be. This is mostly because The Empty Man really ends up being 3 films run end to end, not 3 distinct films, though how in God's name the first has anything to do with the second, other than in adding a bit of atmospheric flavor, isn't clear for quite a long stretch. The point being, the film keeps changing often enough that even when it's boring, and it definitely is capable of being boring, it's not boring for too very long. The first film is probably the best. It is certainly the tittiest in 1995. 4 American friends are on a mountaineering adventure in Bhutan, and we pick up with them right around the time the adventure is kicking into overdrive, thanks to a terrifyingly scrawny bridge spanning a God-knows-how deep gorge. The cinematography by Anastasis Moses is washed out and skewed, hard to bluish-white all the better, to immediately give us a sense of the thin, cold air and hazy aura of existing in a place more of myth than of the physical world, turning whatever rocky area this was shot in the movie was mostly filmed in South Africa, with a week-long detour to a small town in rural Illinois into something that really does feel like the inaccessible alien roof of the world. It's a great setting for a horror film. Not because it's especially ominous or foreboding. The bridge is certainly terrifying, but not exactly horror movie. Scary, but simply because feels so profoundly inhuman, a space where we simply haven't any business being whatsoever. And that plays out over the opening 20 minutes or so of the movie, which finds one of the friends, Paul Aaron Poole, plunging into a crevasse and getting lost in a cave by the time fellow climber Greg Evan, Johnny, gets to him. Paul is drifted into a catatonic or trance-like state, apparently caught up with contemplating a skeleton that has been arranged into a kind of honorific tableau. It is not exactly a human skeleton either. Whatever it is, it seems to have impressed Paul quite greatly, and after Greg and their friends Ruthie Virginia Cole and Fiona Jessica Matten have dragged Paul back to an old cabin for shelter, things start happening. Seeing stuff that isn't there at first, then Ruthie gets a little ghostly and weird, and by the 3rd day on the mountain, at least 3 of the climbers have died. I don't think it's going too far to say that this prologue is actually genuinely great horror filmmaking. It's atmospheric, but in an unconventional way, rather than using the strong shadows and negative space that horror has been relying on since the silent expressionist days. It's all about flat lighting with limited contrast, and the emptiness of the location is more threatening than the creepiness of it. I think I'd hardly be alone in suggesting that the bridge is much more unnerving than the skeleton at the same time. Nothing about it is art or elevated. Horror, that is in fact one of the reasons that I imagine The Empty Man would have been hard to market on paper. It sounds like it's checking all of the elevated horror boxes, and yet, in the midst of watching it, that's not what it feels like at all. At any rate, once the film's title finally appears, some 20 minutes into it, the P being replaced by a blank spot, I was good and jangled and ready for something else. The second main stretch of the movie is, to be honest, a pretty big disappointment. Not because it shifts genres, though it does so successfully. Now it's 2018, and our protagonist is an ex-cop named James Badal, who's been pretty well checked out of life since his wife and child died in an accident some time ago. What gets him back into the world is when a friend, Nora Marin Ireland, approaches him about helping to find her missing teen daughter, leaving behind a message scrolled in blood on the bathroom wall. The Empty Man made me do it as the real. Police start to investigate. James starts to track down the girl's friends and finds that they all have similar stories. about an urban legend sort of figure who they might have collectively accidentally summoned a ghost that troubles you for 2 days and then kills you on the third. For all of them, the third day is coming right along, and given that right around when we met James, the words "first day" were presented on screen in enormous text, it's pretty clear that he's not in much better shape than the kids. The best thing The Empty Man has going for it is that it's extremely easy to compare it to The Bi Man from 2017 and Slender Man from 2018. Hell, even just the titles, and conclude that if nothing else, it's surely a lot better than those two movies are. This is an indescribably low bar, of course, but it's still a bar that The Empty Man dances right over. Pryor's directing is a bit more pedestrian than in the terrific prologue, but he's using that absurd running time well to allow moments to slowly ooze over us, getting a sense of tension out of stillness and slowness. The bigger problem is that it all feels so monstrously formulaic, inevitably. Calling to mind the UR text of 21st century horror movies about ghosts who work on a distinct timetable, The Ring, and all the many, many films that have borrowed from it. And James isn't an interesting character, nor is Dale an engaging lead, and we spend damn near every minute with him. So that's all awfully bland until around the midpoint, when the film shifts again and becomes, well, I can't really say that, but it's a very palpable feeling when it happens, as James' investigation takes him to what seems for all the world like a church, centered around the empty man led by the benevolently menacing Arthur Parsons, Stephen Root, making a huge impression with a small role. And here we will leave plot synopsis behind, saying only that whatever the empty man has been, it's not anymore, including arguably no longer being a horror movie, but instead a weird-ass combo pack of paranoia thriller and vision of great cosmic evil, like if Ben Wheatley remade The Parallax View or something. It's nowhere near as perfect as that opening act, but it's more interesting. If only because it's strange, this many new ideas suddenly come flying into the movie Pryor, and his crew also perk right up, creating far more interesting set pieces than the bland shuffling in and out of houses that were going on before, including one excellent scene involving spying on a group of people around a bonfire and the muddy brown blackness of a forest night. The film's second half is messy, but bracingly so. But who this is for, I really can't say. A strong vein of stubborn, frustrating anticlimax is burned into the material in some ways, with James never exactly figuring anything out as he keeps bumble his way from one strange development to the next. It's too conventional a horror film to be this elliptical and to flaunt this many rules as late into the running time, as it does perhaps still something you don't know what to do with, is always better than something you figured out immediately and gotten bored by. For me, nowhere more than in horror. And as ungainingly as The Empty Man is, I was enthralled by everything about the very peculiar shape its story takes in the second half. The distributor's palpable desire to just be rid of the thing is nowhere more plainly demonstrated than in the presence of the 20th Century Fox studio logo at the beginning. Everybody apparently having forgotten that it was renamed 20th Century Studios months prior to the film's October 2020 release. This film, directed by David Pryor, written by David Pryor, produced by Ross, Richard Stephen Christy, starring James Badale, Marin, Ireland cinematography. Anista's Mike Hose, edited by Andrew Buckland. David Pryor, music by Christopher Young Production Company's 20th Century Fox Boom Studios, out of Africa. Entertainment distributed ed by 20th Century Fox. Release dates October 22nd, 2020 in Mexico, October 23rd, 2020 in United States. Running time 137 minutes. Countries United States, South Africa, United Kingdom. Language English. Budget $16 million. Box office $4.8 million. So guys, this is the review of The Empty Man movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.